All right, good morning. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 12, Section 3. Our lesson objectives are to identify the issues that led to rising sectional differences. Sectionalism is when you basically are you're more loyal to a section of the country as opposed to the whole entire country. Second is to analyze the issues in the debate over states' rights. And third, to understand the meaning of states' rights. So today what we're going to talk about is how Andrew Jackson dealt with the idea of states' rights. And this is the one thing in Jackson's tenure as president that I would say he actually did well on and got correct. Now, conflicts over states' rights, rising sectional differences. Andrew Jackson took over as president in 1829, and the country was being pulled apart by conflicts among its three main sections. The three major issues concerned were the sale of public lands, internal improvements, and tariffs. Now, your three major sections at the time were basically your northeast, or your, basically like where New England, New York, Pennsylvania, all those states are. Then you had the southern states, which basically would have been from Maryland down through Georgia. And then you had your western states like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and these regions. So those are your three major regions. So basically your west, your north, and your south. Northeasterners did not want land in the west sold for cheap because it would attract the workers they needed in their factories, but the west wanted cheap land to attract settlement. So you see those two issues between the west and the northeast because, the northeasterners, they had all the factories, and the westerners, they had farming. So the westerners wanted to attract more people out there to get more farmers, to get more people. And the northeasterners didn't want to lose their people. Eventually there would be conflict between the north and the south, and this conflict that you're going to start seeing arise is going to be stuff that is going to continue to take place for decades and is eventually going to be that leads to the Civil War. The Northeast and the West wanted the government to spend money on internal improvement, while the South did not want this because it was paid for through tariffs. So the only real taxes at the time were tariffs, which are taxes on either outgoing goods or incoming goods from the country. And since they couldn't tax outgoing goods, they basically taxed incoming goods. And the South relied on England and France, mostly England, for the mass majority of their goods. So it meant it was costing more for the South, and they saw that as unfair. Now, the Tariff of Abominations. In 1828, in the last months of John Quincy Adams' presidency, Congress passed a tariff that drastically rose the tariffs on raw materials and manufactured goods. This really had nothing to do with John Quincy Adams, but it once again gave John Quincy Adams a bad name. Southerners believed the economic interests of the Northeast was determining national policy, and they called the Tariff of Abominations. The South hated the tariff, and it helped to get Andrew Jackson elected. So I'm guessing somewhere along the line in Congress, Andrew Jackson probably had a little bit of, he had a little bit to do with this to help it coming about because, like I said, as soon as John Quincy Adams became president, Andrew Jackson made sure he could do everything in his power to make sure that he did not have a good presidency. Now, the crisis over nullification. John C. Calhoun, this is Calhoun here, came up with the doctrine of nullification, stating that a state had the right to nullify a federal law it considers unconstitutional. This may sound familiar because we talked about this before. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison are actually the first two to come up with this idea. Calhoun just now expands it. Because South Carolina was hit so hard by the tariff, they threatened to secede from the Union, which means basically they're saying they're going to break away and become their own country. Calhoun extended the Kentucky Resolution, which was the resolution that was created by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, stating that a state could nullify a federal law within its borders because he did not feel that a law set up to benefit one part of the country was fair. And, that's true. It really is true. Now, whether the laws are being set up to actually benefit one part of the country is, that's up for debate. In the summer of 1828, Calhoun wrote a document called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. He did not sign it because of the fact that it was such a controversial thing, and he knew that it could potentially cause him problems. So he wrote it, but he was unwilling to actually sign it at the time. Now, the states' rights debate. The debate of states' rights was one fought since the separation from Britain and would continue bitterly until the Civil War. The Webster-Haney debate between Daniel Webster and Robert Y. Haney was one of the great debates in American history. And this is Webster, Daniel Webster, who was one of the great orators of the time, and then Robert Y. Haney. Haney said the states had the rights to nullify the law to maintain their freedom, while Webster argued that it was the people, not the states, that maintained the Union. So it was, really back and forth debate, and it was basically from Webster, who was a Northerner, and Haney, who was a Southerner. Now, Jackson had not yet stated his position on states' rights, even though Calhoun was his vice president. So Jackson and Calhoun, they were really tight. They were real close. Jackson had chosen Calhoun as his vice president, and Calhoun made the calculated error that he believed that Jackson would be on his side simply because they were friends. He would soon state his position at a dinner party to honor the birthday of Thomas Jefferson. So Jackson has a birthday party, basically, or a dinner party that's going to honor Thomas Jefferson, and he's set to toast up at the head of the table. He stands up and looks directly at Calhoun and says, "Our federal union, it must be preserved." And basically what he's saying is, you will not be breaking away. There will not be anybody that is seceding from our country, and we are going to preserve it no matter what. Calhoun looked at him. He was the next to toast. He said, "The Union next to our liberty, the most dear. May we all remember that it can only be preserved by respecting the rights of the states and distributing equally the benefits and burdens of the Union." He then looked away, and from that moment on, Jackson and Calhoun were political enemies. So now you have a president and a vice president who are actually political enemies with each other. So it was a pretty trying time. Now, South Carolina threatens to secede. Jackson did not want the South to attempt to secede, so Jackson asked Congress to lower the tariff, which they did in 1832. So he's trying to work with South Carolina. Jackson actually is trying to work with South Carolina. He's a Southerner by birth. He does see things their way. South Carolina's leaders threatened to secede if the federal government tried to collect tariffs. After Jackson won the election of 1832, he threatened to use force to see that federal laws were obeyed. He openly, flat out threatened the congressman from South Carolina, and he said if you guys secede from the Union, that he personally would come down to South Carolina and hang all of the leaders from the trees, from the closest trees. And he was serious. Jackson did not make idle threats. If he said he was going to do something, he would do it. In the Senate, Henry Clay, we've talked about him before, he's the great compromiser, quickly passed a bill, and the crisis ended, and South Carolina stayed in the Union for now. Eventually we will have the Civil War where some of them will secede, but at this point they're going to stay in the Union. Now, if you have any questions, get a hold of me. Make sure that you're getting the homework done. Make sure you're reading the sections as well. Have a great day.